Earlier, we learned how to use the $sign function in jQuery to select the window object. One of the very powerful tools that jQuery offers is how it can select elements. First, we're going to look how we can select by ID. jQuery can select elements by ID just like how we use the document.getElementById method. But now we have to be more specific. When we want to select an ID, it's like selecting an ID in CSS. We need to add the $sign character in front of the ID name. So here in this first section on the left, we have our jQuery. On the right section here, we have our HTML. In the jQuery, we just have variable myId is equal to $sign, parentheses, there's an opening one there, and there's a closing one here. We have apostrophes, or if you like, you can use quotation marks. And this is how we tell jQuery exactly what we want to look for. Here we have the $sign in front of element ID. What this is going to look for is just like in CSS where we use the $sign as ID, it's going to look for ID element ID. So again, to select the div ID of an element, we must use the $sign in front of the selector. From there, we can modify the element ID any way we like using JavaScript. Next, we can select by class. Now with class, we can also select more than one element at a time. To do this, just like CSS, we use the period in front of the to be selected class. For example, in our jQuery, we have variable all bold is equal to our selector here, right? We close it, we have got a semicolon, we've got a parentheses, again, you can use quotation marks inside there, and we have class bold, just like in CSS. Where here we have our HTML, I guess, and our CSS here. We have class bold. It's just saying here that it is going to be bold. We've got our body, span, and a div. Both the span and the div share a class of bold. The all bolds variable is going to have power over both of these elements because it selected this element and this element. And it's because it's looking for a class, and it's going to look for more than just one. It's going to look for every match possible. Now, if we don't want to select something by its ID or its class, we can also select it by its element. And this is pretty easy as well. And again, this follows the same rules as CSS does, where we have variable, the body, and the variable name doesn't matter. Our selector, open parentheses, closing parentheses, and our semicolon. Then we have our quotation marks in here. And in this one, we just wrote body. If you look at the HTML, we have our doc type, HTML, open head, open body, close HTML. Variable, the body, is going to select all of this, anything that's inside of that, including the body element itself. And just like in CSS, if we wanted to style the body, we wouldn't put a $sign in front of it, we would not put a period in front of it. We would just leave it the way it is, and then we can style the body that way. The jQuery selectors work the exact same way. Now we can also select by attribute. With the attribute selector, we have many options available. We can select the value of an attribute that starts with whatever we tell it to match. It can select a value that is equal to or not equal to exactly what we tell it to look for, etc., etc. There are so many different ways to look for different attributes. But right now, I'm not going to overload you with different ways to select elements. For now, we're just going to cover the is equal to selector. So here we have jQuery variable all names is equal to our selector, right? We have apostrophes, and that's because we use quotation marks inside there. We could switch them around and use quotations on the outside and apostrophes on the inside. It doesn't really matter. We have a hard bracket, name is equal to what we're looking for. We close the attribute, and then we have another closing bracket, or a hard bracket. And this will look for anything that has the name of test name. So here it will select both of these because both of these share the same name. Now if we wanted to get more specific and we only wanted to select span, we could do that. We would just write span, and in here we'd have name is equal to test name. And again, that would select both spans. Now if we had a div in here, and we wanted to get a little bit more specific, then we could select div where the attribute name is equal to test name, and that's only going to select this one here. That's because we have our div, we have the name, and the name is equal to test name, and that matches this. Now just as a finishing note, if you find these selectors do not work when you try them, and you are 100% sure that they are correct and they should definitely be working, you might need to actually put them inside the ready method. The reason that we have to let the window load and check to see if it's ready to actually execute any of our JavaScript is because the browser is actually trying to load your selectors or your jQuery before the actual jQuery code was done loading. And this, as a result, becomes a problem, where your JavaScript is trying to execute particular functions, such as a selector function. However, that function has not been defined. So it's trying to use jQuery, but there is no jQuery to use yet. It's not fully loaded. So the solution to this problem is to use the window selector, just like this, the ready method, function parentheses. This is our function here with our curly brackets. We close our ready method, and we end it with a semicolon. And then in here we can put any of the jQuery we want. And what this does is it allows jQuery to actually load, which is what we're saying here, window ready, or when jQuery is ready, when the window is done loading. And then it can actually use the selector because this function now exists through jQuery. Quite often what we will do is we will actually put all of our jQuery inside here, and that's just to make sure that the jQuery will actually work. Now right now it might seem like a lot of work, but it actually isn't. And it becomes very, very convenient for us. jQuery is a JavaScript library that allows us to write so much powerful code without writing much code at all. And in the long run, it actually turns out to be a lot more convenient and a lot less code than what JavaScript would be.